Also, this harmonium's better. special welcome to Hari Vilasa Prabhu's mother coming to visit. Thank you so much for first time at Bhagavata. Say your name again for us. I'm so bad with names.
Tanu Maria.
Tanu Maria Devi Dasi. Hare Krishna. And Hari Vilasa Prabhu is speaking to us today on Lord Ram. He's a very, very wonderful devotee here with his wife, who is also a very, very wonderful devotee, Sukhanti Gaurangi. And Hari Vilasa is originally from South Africa, and he joined Krishna consciousness at quite a young age with many other devotees there in South Africa, some of whom we know, like Hermalinda Kirtan. There's quite a many South African devotees. And he did many, many different services in that yatra, and he's a disciple of Kadamba Kanna Swami. And he came to New York and served at the Brooklyn Temple for many, many years in different various capacities, also as vice president of the temple, and married his wife Sukhanti Gaurangi after many years in the Brahmachari ashram, and they served there together, and then they moved out, but they are still actively serving the Brooklyn Temple and also actively serving Bhakti Center. So thank you so much for being here today. Hare Krishna.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. 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 Om Jnanatirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurumritam Nena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Nena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Gadamayam Dadati Swavadantikam Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shrivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Thank you very much for being here today. It's better. So, I know it's a little late. We had Lord Ram's appearance day. It was about last week, a little more than a week ago, I believe.
On Tuesday.
Yeah. And but I wanted to ride the Lord Ram wave because recently I was in India, and for many years I don't know who is here has really sort of read the Ramayana, some kind of version of the Ramayana, the Ramayana. So I don't know if you've ever had that experience when you start reading the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, then you sometimes wish, we realize how spoiled we are with having Prabhupada's translations of something like the Bhagavatam, where you have the verse by verse translation. And sometimes you're reading the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, you think, I wish to actually see, what's that verse, what was actually happening here. And but for a long time I wasn't able to find a Ramayana that had that kind of translation. And then I went to India recently for the first time in a while. I was there a little bit before, but I didn't make it to my favorite bookshops. But this time around I was there and I made it to my favorite bookshop, and I somehow picked up this book here, which is an amazing translation of the Ramayana by devotees, led by a devotee called Vidwan Gauranga Prabhu, who's based in Mayapur, a very, very nice devotee and a scholar. And what he did is he basically did a translation of the Ramayana in Prabhupada style. So verse by verse, word by word translation with a commentary, with a purport. And it was just been such an amazing, I was just so grateful for that work, because it does take a lot of work, a lot of effort to really make a translation like that. And I was just, since I've been back from India, I was reading a little bit, and there's really some amazing things that I picked up here that I wanted to share a little bit about. Now, this verse by verse translation is very nice, and what's also added in here is a commentary. He sort of makes an amalgamation, let's say a translation of a commentary always also sometimes summarizes it a little bit. A very well-known commentary called the Ramayana Bhushana, which is made by a commentator from the Sri Sampradaya called Sri Govindaraj. I was trying to get some details on when exactly it was written, so exactly clear. So at some point between the 12th and the 18th century, basically. They're not really sure exactly where it fits in, but one of the more very traditional kind of commentaries on the Ramayana. And in one section of his commentary, he makes this summary, which he calls the 18 cardinal teachings, the 18 main teachings of the Ramayana. And it's very interesting how he sets it out. He says the Ramayana is a very big book and a lot of lessons to be learned, but we see that the big part of approaching scripture and a big part of what we get from approaching scripture through a tradition, through a sampradaya, through commentaries, is that we get an understanding of, well, what's the point? What's the point? What's the point of the book? And that differs quite a bit because of the person. And you will see that if you ever have the misfortune of studying modern literary theory, sometimes that can go like very postmodern kind of ideas where at a certain point the idea is, oh, there is no point. It's like whatever you make of it. It's like even the author's intent is not really that important anymore. The text just has a life of its own, and it's all just about interpretation, and everybody can have a free go at what they think the text means, and then you can have everybody playing their interesting games where they come up with, what really is the aim of the text. But if we go to the traditional world, it was very much not like that. The idea was that, well, there's a point. The person who composed this literature had some kind of point that he wanted to make. There was a goal to it. And a big part of studying the text or approaching the text is in trying to figure out, well, what is the main point? And then in the tradition, there's all these various ways that commentators would sort of highlight, well, how do you decide what was the point of the author? There's ways like, for example, what is repeated within the text? What is at the beginning of the text and what is at the end of the text? What do you put in the introduction? What do you put in the conclusion? What are the novel arguments that introduce? So all these sort of, hermeneutical ways that you try to understand what is the point that the author was trying to make. And we see that, same like if you read Prabhupada's Gita, for example, when you get Prabhupada in the beginning of his Gita, he made it very clear when they asked him what was the point. Prabhupada said he came to America and he saw that there was more than 700 English translations of the Bhagavad Gita available. Prabhupada said, well, one could ask him, why would you want to create another one? If there's already so many translations available, what would you add by giving another translation of the Bhagavad Gita? Prabhupada said very simple. He said that the point of my Bhagavad Gita, the point of his translation, was to just take, firstly, to take Krishna's words as they are, and just to look at the whole Bhagavad Gita from the point of the conclusion of the Bhagavad Gita, which is that we have to surrender unto Krishna. If you go through the whole Bhagavad Gita, you see at the end that conclusion is reached. Many things are discussed, but at the end, that's sort of the point. The point of the book is where Krishna tells Arjuna, I've said so many different things to you now, but my advice to you is to surrender unto my will. And that's the point of the book. And then Prabhupada's commentary then is looking at the whole book, all the various sections, but from keeping in mind what was the end point, what is the conclusion of the book. And therefore Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita is very powerful. If you read Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita, it changes lives. Prabhupada said that for hundreds of years, people have been studying the Bhagavad Gita in the Western world, but no one became a devotee. No one actually surrendered unto Krishna. So we see the importance. It's not just about the book. It's not just about reading the text, but it's about understanding what is the point. You have to be led to the point, and then one can actually really unlock what the book can give us, unlock the teaching that is there. And if you never get to the point, you can study all kinds of books for hundreds of years, and it will not really have an effect. It will not really have that transformation of the heart, because you don't come to the point. You can know a lot about it. You can read so many things, and you see that Prabhupada, when he met Professor Kartovsky, I think that was his name, in Russia, who was, what was his name, is that right? Kartovsky is probably, I think it sounds like almost what they call a potato in Russian, isn't it? So, sorry about that. Yes, Professor Kartovsky. So he, we see that he was a huge scholar. He was working in, I think, the University of Moscow or whatever, and he was leading some Vedic research institute, and he was a Sanskrit scholar, and they were busy with this huge project of translating all these Upanishads and scriptures into Russian. And Prabhupada had this very interesting, you can see it's recorded, you can read the discussion Prabhupada had with him. And at some point, Prabhupada starts to speak about his Bhagavad Gita and the translation. Prabhupada makes this point that the soul, the soul is eternal, and the soul has at the end of this body, the soul takes another birth. And then we see that the professor stopped him, and the professor said, Swamiji, he said, at the end of life, that's it. The soul is not eternal, the soul doesn't continue existing. And Prabhupada was so shocked. You can read Prabhupada was like, sometimes you can hear Prabhupada's recordings, he has this sound, and Prabhupada goes like this. He says, huh? Prabhupada was almost like, what? What are you saying? You've been studying this book you've been studying so much hours, you understand the Sanskrit, but you're not accepting the basic point that the soul is eternal. And Prabhupada was almost so disappointed. You can see when you read the discussion, Prabhupada's like, oh, this guy is just, wow, what a disappointment. Came all the way here to speak to a Russian professor of the Bhagavad Gita, and he doesn't even accept the foundational tenet that the soul is eternal. So what can we really then discuss about the Bhagavad Gita? So, interesting point then, and we see that intelligence is not enough. That's not what makes the difference. We get highly intelligent people who don't get the point. And then you can, at the other side, you can get people that are very simple, that are not necessarily Sanskrit scholars or whatever, but they get the point. They get the point of the book. And we see that when Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, when he was traveling in South India, he then at some point was traveling and he met a Brahmana. Now this Brahmana was reciting the Bhagavad Gita, but this Brahmana was not very fluent. His Sanskrit was not very good. His pronunciation was not very proper, and he didn't really understand Sanskrit grammar that much. I'm not sure really how bad his Sanskrit was, if it was just his pronunciation was bad or what extent, but it was very clear that other people were making fun of him because he was reciting and it just, you could hear he doesn't really get it. But he was reciting this book. He was reciting the Bhagavad Gita and he was crying. And Lord Chaitanya looked at this person and he said, well, who's this guy? Well, what is he doing? Why is he's reciting the Bhagavad Gita? Okay, it seems like his Sanskrit pronunciation is not so good, but something's happening here. And Lord Chaitanya went to him. Lord Chaitanya said, my dear sir, can you please explain to me, why are you chanting this Bhagavad Gita? What are you doing here? And he said, and the Brahmana said, I'm actually illiterate. I'm not really so good, but my spiritual master, he has told me that I should chant this Bhagavad Gita every day. So that is what I'm doing. I'm chanting the Bhagavad Gita. And Lord Chaitanya looked at him and says, yes, I see that, but my question to you is, why are you crying? Like what is the reason for why are you crying? What are you thinking about? And the Brahmana said that, as I chant these slokas, I can't really understand exactly what I'm chanting. But as I'm chanting them, I'm seeing Krishna, who has become the chariot driver of Arjuna, and who is basically mercifully taking control of Arjuna's life and protecting him, being merciful unto him. When I have that image of my mind, then I just shed tears. And then Lord Chaitanya said, this person, his chanting of the Bhagavad Gita is perfect, because he gets the point. So when we then look at a commentator, this commentary of Sri Govindaraj, then we see that he very much in the beginning of the text, he wants to make it very clear, well, what is the point of the Ramayana? Because once we get the point, then we will be able to really penetrate into what is really trying to be communicated to us. Now, what is an interesting question then is, if Valmiki, who was the author of the Ramayana, if he was the author, why didn't he just say at the beginning of the book, this is the point. These are the 18 points I'm trying to make. It's the question, why didn't the author just say it? Now then, we see, at least in this commentary by Vidwan Garanga, he makes the point that he looks then at something that think is very interesting for us, coming also from a Western tradition or Western education, is that something that we sometimes forget when we read translated versions of whether it's the Bhagavatam or the Ramayana or the Mahabharata. And that is that ultimately these texts at their root are actually poems. It's not just books, it's not a historical book, it is poetry. Now, unfortunately, a lot of it gets lost in English translation, and when you translate poetry from one language to another, it's very complicated, because you have to decide, well, what are you going to go for? Because you're gonna have to adjust one thing or another. Either you have to put all the information in, or you have to somehow change it a little bit to turn it into English poetry. And we see some devotees have tried to do that. They've taken the Bhagavad Gita and they tried to translate into poetic form, where it's like English poetry, Bhagavad Gita. But when we look at Prabhupada's Bhagavatam, or generally texts that try to really focus on the meaning of what each verse is saying, then usually it's not translated in poetry form. But we sometimes forget that it really is poetry. Very strict meter, and that's why it's usually chanted, not usually just read. It's chanted. It's something that is poetic. And there is this concept in Sanskrit poetics, something called dhvani, which means what they call poetical suggestion, meaning that a poet is not supposed to say explicitly what he is trying to communicate. That sort of, it's a little too blunt. The poem is trying to suggest. Just like if you look at a painting, it's not that the artist had to at the bottom paint, oh, this is a picture of Krishna and Radha. No, you're supposed to see it. When you look at the painting, the painting is supposed to show you what the artist is wanting to show you. So similarly, the poet, he is trying to suggest something. He's very much trying to communicate something. But it is then the job of the commentators to bring out, well, what is being suggested here? And this idea that there's all these various layers of meaning. There's the meanings of the word themselves, then there's the figurative meaning, when you have metaphors, but then even deeper than that is the layer of the dhvani, which is the deep suggestion, what do they call it? Which is communicating ultimately the rasa behind. It is supposed to make you feel something. It's not supposed to just make you understand something. It's not supposed to just communicate information to you. It's supposed to connect you with the rasa, the feeling, the relationship, what it means to connect with Krishna. Just like when we see that Brahmana who was chanting the Bhagavad Gita, he was connecting with the dhvani of the Bhagavad Gita. He got it. He was shedding tears when he understood what was really being communicated. So, very interesting then to think when we approach these books that that is what we're trying to reach. It's not just about the information, it's not just about the metaphors. The purpose of all these things is to bring us to the deeper point of the meaning. And that meaning is very much the rasa, the experience of connecting with Krishna. So, Sri Govindaraj then, he breaks it down. 18 cardinal teachings, 18 points that are specifically being communicated to us in the Ramayana. And it's very interesting if we look at, he will then, what I'm going to do now is sort of give an overview of these 18 points, not get too much into it, just sort of the main things that I find very interesting. But then he would, at each point, pull out examples in the Ramayana, show here this is being communicated, that is being communicated. It's very interesting then when you do that and then you read the Ramayana and you see what all these stories are really pointing us towards. Okay, so let us just sort of go over these 18 points step by step, and then I will, at the end we can have some questions. And as I said, for those of you who came a little later, everything I'm reading here is based on this amazing book, a translation in the style of Prabhupada's translation, word for word verses of the Valmiki Ramayana. It only came out in 2019, so sometimes if you're a devotee, you're used to all the books that are out there, but this is something a little new. I never knew it existed until I recently went to India. And it's a wonderful book, very loyal to Srila Prabhupada's tradition, points out wherever Prabhupada commentated on the Ramayana, it's also built in there, and has some wonderful sections like these other commentaries and has some interesting, it takes a lot from, it also has a summary of the Ramayana from the Madhva Sampradaya. So it really looks at the tradition of the Ramayana, brings it all together in one book. I think the whole set is about whatever, a few books, you know, like 10, 12 books. And but it's only what, $80. So really best $80 I've ever spent. So if you ever are in India, pick it up. Really is worth it to have it there. Okay, so let's take a look. So the first cardinal teaching of the Ramayana, as we can imagine, the first step is then understanding that the supreme Brahman, the supreme truth, is Balram. Okay, that is unless you get that, you're gonna miss, you know, it's gonna be, you're sort of gonna miss what's happening here. To really appreciate the power of understanding the theology of the avatars, the idea that God himself can enter into this world, it is such a foundational principle of bhakti, and really is such a foundational way of understanding that God is a person. He has to show his personhood, his form in this world. Otherwise, he's not going to get it. Otherwise, your relationship with God will always tend towards an impersonal understanding, and you won't understand. You have to get this principle that God is a person and he can personally manifest within this world. So therefore, naturally, it all starts with understanding that Ram is not just a great king, not just a great person. He is God. He is the supreme absolute truth, Bhagavan, that has appeared. And naturally, then you can imagine a whole section, all the verses, and throughout the whole Ramayana, how it's established again and again and again by various sources and various things that Ram did that made it clear that he is not an ordinary person. He is the supreme absolute truth. The second cardinal teaching then, once one understands, okay, Lord Ram, the supreme absolute truth, is a person, Lord Ram. The question is, well, how can we attain that truth? How can we connect with that truth? How can we make that connection with Lord Ram? And then it is very simple. It is by surrender, Sharanagati. That is how one can connect with God. It's not just knowledge, it's not just understanding, it is by an act of will, by submission to the will of God. That is how one can connect with God. That is how we establish that relationship with the Lord. And actually then there's the 6 steps of surrender, of Sharanagati. The first one being accepting whatever is favorable to God, rejecting whatever is unfavorable to God, having faith in God's protection, and actually being dependent on the protection of God, which is not the same thing. Very interesting. We can have faith that God can protect us, but are you actually going to depend on God's protection? Are you going to still make some other alternative arrangements? Even though you know God can protect you, but there's other ways that you can sort of try to protect yourself. So then, depending on the Lord's protection. Then the 5th one, abandoning self-interest, self-surrender, really then trying to negate any alternative interest except for God. And then the 6th one, interestingly enough, is an attitude of humility, submission, being meek and humble in front of God, really curbing that tendency of passion and pride that will come between us. Even if we have faith, even if so many things are there, but if pride is there, it will come between us and our ability to submit to the will of God. So that is then the second principle. It is surrender. By surrender, we can connect with God. Now then, even though the principle of surrender is relatively simple, but there's so much detail in surrender. And we have all experienced this. Yeah? When we come, we have the experience of accepting, oh, yes, this is it. God exists, Krishna is God, Ram is God, and I want to surrender to him. And then we start the process, but then we realize, wow, even though it's sort of a simple idea, there's a lot to it. How does it work? How do you put it into practice? How do you connect it with your actual life, with where you are, with the various stages of your life? So even though the idea of surrender is very simple, there's a lot of aspects to it. And this is then highlighted in various ways. And then we see in the Ramayana, it's not just that there's this one perfect devotee. It's like Lord Ram, and this one who's just like the perfect devotee. Like if you're in high school, there's the perfect high school student who is, what does that mean? He's just a quarterback. He is the best academic. He is also this. He's the homecoming king or whatever. And that's what it means to surrender to God. This is like this sort of perfect devotee. And in our tradition, okay, what does it mean? Okay, when you were 5 years old, you became a brahmachari, and then when you were 12, you took sannyas, and and then you just do this, and you know Sanskrit, and that sort of. No, it's not like that. There's countless different kinds of people with countless different kinds of situations, and all of them, if you start to surrender to God, it will look very different because we're all very different. So then we see these various characters. We see Hanuman, okay, naturally very surrendered to Lord Ram. But then we see Vibhishana, who was the brother, the brother of Ravana, who also surrendered. And it was very different. Vibhishana's surrender was very different than Hanuman's surrender. We see Lakshman, naturally Lord Ram's brothers, extremely surrendered to him. But their path of surrender was very different than the brother of Ravana, because he was the brother of Ravana. It's going to have a little bit of an influence on how things play out. If your brother is Ravana, or if your brother is Lord Ram, we see then so many different personalities in the Ramayana who surrender to God, and then we see how it plays out, all these various situations. So that's a big point of the Ramayana, is the question of surrendering to God, how to do it, and then showing us these various personalities and how it plays out in their life. Now the third cardinal teaching is to understand what is the purpose of surrendering to God. This was something that you can sometimes forget. The purpose of surrendering to God is to attain devotional service unto God, is to attain the service of God. That's the goal. The goal is not to become liberated from suffering. The goal is not to, be liberated. The goal is not to become famous. The goal is not to get the side benefits. The ultimate goal, the real point of surrendering process, is just to attain the service of Krishna's lotus feet, to establish that relationship with God and to serve God. And there's nothing beyond that. And we see that in other traditions, specifically in the more impersonalist traditions, they would see bhakti as a means to an end. The moment you see bhakti as a means to an end, then things change a lot. Then you don't actually really understand what bhakti is. Bhakti is no means to an end. It is the end. And you start serving God in this life, and you continue serving, and then one day your body will drop dead. And what happens is your service will just continue. That is our conception of the point of surrender, that there's nothing beyond it. It is just establishing that connection with Krishna, performing your service, and that is the point. It's just to have the opportunity to serve God. And that's the purpose of surrender. The fourth teaching of the Ramayana explains to us that in this process of surrender, there is a need for a mediator. And that we see oftentimes when people make that connection with Lord Ram, it comes through someone. The striking example they have is at the end, when Sita after she was kidnapped by Ravana, then she had her kept by these Rakshashis, these female demonesses that were sort of guarding her and tormenting her. But one of them became favorable to Sita. In her heart it changed. She became favorably inclined. And then at some point, as the battle was starting, when they realized that Ravana is going to die, she told all these other Rakshashis, she said to them, listen, shift your allegiance from Ravana to Lord Ram. He is going to win. Your master will be slaughtered. And she actually convinced these Rakshashis to change. And then when Ram came, he wanted to kill them. And then Sita said, no, she said, don't do that. Because before the battle was even lost, they had already changed. They'd come over to my side. So that's an example that the commentator lifts out of showing how the power of the mediator, that sometimes making that direct connection with God is very tricky because we are very far away. But by getting access to the pure devotees, to the devotees themselves, they can connect us. They are the mediators. And in one sense, there's one verse that explains that actually the Ramayana is described as, it is the great poem that describes the activities of Sita. That's really what the Ramayana is actually about Sita, because she is the great mediator. She she is the gatekeeper of attaining the access to Lord Ram's lotus feet. So very interesting that this need of a mediator is very strongly explained here, and it comes out again and again. We see that when Vibhishan came to surrender to Lord Ram, he couldn't directly go to Ram because Ram would have killed him because he was still an enemy. So he approached the monkeys, and he had to approach the monkeys and tell them, please, I come in peace. Can you take me to Lord Ram? And the monkeys then were the ones who took him. And they decided, they said, this guy looks okay. I think he's okay. And then they're the ones who were able to bring him to Lord Ram. So the power of a mediator. The fifth teaching of the Ramayana speaks about the nature of the candidate, the qualities of the person who is trying to surrender, showing naturally then these various people who were united, even though they're all very different in all very different situations, but united by the attitude, the devotional attitude, what we call the service attitude. Service attitude, an idea of realizing their dependence on Lord Ram. Whether it was Lakshman or whether it was Vibhishan, even though their situation was very different, but the attitude of desiring to serve Lord Ram, that is the secret thing that unites them. And same with us all in this room. We all come from vastly different situations, all kinds of different, even in our past life, we're all in different trajectories and where we are at. But at the end, what unifies each of us is that we have that service attitude, the desire to serve. And we oftentimes underestimate the power of just the simple attitude of wanting to serve. And we think that the solutions to our problem are these very complicated things, or huge changes in our situation, or whether it's this or that. But actually, if you just cultivate that seed of the attitude of just wanting to be a servant, that service attitude is the most powerful weapon you have in your arsenal. And it's the thing that will have the most transformational results in your whole life, is simply taking that attitude, holding on to it, and strengthening it. The sixth teaching then is showing naturally dependence on the Lord, and showing a few different examples. So 6 and 7 is the one is dependence on the Lord, and the other one is dependence on the pure devotees. And we see that exemplified by Lord Ram's brothers, who, when he was told to leave the forest, we see that his brother Bharat, who was then to be proclaimed the king or the heir, it was very difficult for him. But he was able to do it. He did it ultimately because Lord Ram told him to do it. And while he was doing the whole process, we see that he took these extreme vows, and Lord Ram gave him his shoes. He said, okay, while you are fulfilling your duty on the throne, you stay dependent upon me. You stay dependent upon me as you perform your duties. And he gave him these shoes, and he would every day take these shoes on his head. And even though he was the king of Ayodhya, he would execute those duties in strict dependence on the will of Lord Ram. Let's see here. The eighth principle is the 5 things that need to be known, which is the supreme truth, the nature of the soul, the way of attaining, the means of attaining, which means bhakti, the results of attaining bhakti, and the obstacles to obtaining bhakti. The 9th teaching of the Ramayana is that for bhakti to really be effective, there has to be a sense of exclusivity, exclusive focus on the Supreme Lord. And it shows, for example, that Ravana, he was greatly blessed by both Lord Brahma and by Lord Shiva, but at the end, he was still killed by Lord Vishnu. So showing, in one sense, how taking shelter of the demigods, it's not equal. It's not going to help you, because at the end there is the supreme absolute truth. Another example of the exclusivity that it shows us that how your father cannot save you, because it shows us what happens in Dasarath's life, that at the end, even though he was the king, he was so favorably inclined to Lord Ram, but at the end things played out in such a way that he couldn't actually even bestow the kingdom onto him. So it shows that your father cannot save you. Your father cannot save you. It shows us your mother cannot save you ultimately, because it shows us how Kaikeyi ultimately was the one who caused the whole issue. Lord Ram's stepmother, or Ram's, the other wife of the king, who at the end, did not want Lord Ram to be the king. So it shows us even there, your mother cannot save you ultimately. And then we saw, it also shows us how your brothers cannot save you. Because it shows us how Vibhishana was the brother of Ravana, and Vibhishana ultimately abandoned Ravana and surrendered to Lord Ram. And then we see the other brother of Ravana, who was Indrajit, who was extremely powerful, but at the end, he was killed by Lord Ram. It shows us that your mother, the demigods, your parents, your siblings, no one can save you. Ultimately, it is only the Lord that can save us. So in that way, it also shows us the importance of exclusively focusing or surrendering to the Supreme Lord, and not diverting it to all these other avenues where we think, oh, something here or there. That's the nature of bhakti, is that exclusivity is very important. Just like we see in marriage, if you're married to someone, but if there is infidelity, then all the other things you do don't really measure up that much. It's like you can't say, oh, but I'm still quite a decent husband, because if you sort of compare it, like I do all these other things, and it sort of balances out the fact that I'm not really faithful. That's not how it works. It doesn't work like that. Fidelity cannot be compromised for anything else. So similarly, in our surrendering to the Supreme Lord, we may do so many wonderful service. That's very nice. But is it exclusive? Is your heart exclusively focused on the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord? If that exclusivity is not there, then the relationship is not very strong, regardless of whatever else may be there. The 10th principle, showing us the need of an acharya, so the need of an ideal example, and in this example being Hanuman, because Hanuman is a devotee. He is not the Supreme Lord, he is a jiva like us, but he is the pure devotee. That essential need of having people who show us the ideal. It's very important. In the modern world, we've become so jaded, and you see it a lot in modern entertainment. Many modern shows and books, it's all about showing imperfect people. It's all about showing, like so many shows about criminals and their life, and like showing sort of how even bad people are sort of good. And a lot of it is about, there's so much ras that's being churned about people that degraded people and somehow showing their lives. So the need for someone who is perfect. Yes, it might not be me, but it's possible. And you can see these people, and we see that then how people were transformed by Srila Prabhupada's experience. Just someone who was just faultless. He was just a sinless person. Just didn't perform any sins. He's completely clean. Nothing. Didn't do anything. You see so many people, yes, they can criticize Prabhupada for, if you see people, Prabhupada's critics, they can say, oh, whatever, they don't like his conclusions, they don't like his philosophy. They say, oh, they criticize Prabhupada for being picked up in a Rolls Royce in the airport. People make up all these criticisms. But at the end, no one can really criticize Prabhupada for what he did. Nothing happened with any of his female disciples. Nothing happened. So many things. Didn't do anything. It was completely clean. So the need of an acharya, of someone just showing, hey, there is such a thing as becoming a pure devotee. It's possible. It's essential. So we see in the Ramayana, we see Hanuman, who was just the ideal servitor of Lord Ram, completely sold out. Never for a moment. There's never a moment where he doubted, where he faltered, where he made a mistake. Not that he never made mistakes, but in his heart, just completely fixed, without a doubt. So that is an essential thing to have. The pure devotees, the acharyas. Otherwise, our faith, we become, what's the word? We become skeptical. We become just, it's sort of good, but can anyone really do it? I don't really know. It's not really possible. It's a good idea though, but everybody is like this. And you see that. We see that Martin Luther, when he was himself, a monk in the Catholic tradition. And why do we not have any monks in the Protestant church? Because Martin Luther, he couldn't do it. He saw in himself that he was actually corrupted. He so I'm not actually a real monk. And he gave up his monastic vows and he married a nun. And then in his church, no monks. Because why? Oh, I couldn't do it. So therefore, actually no one can really do it. Everybody is just faking it. Everybody is just all fake. It's like, no, you couldn't do it, that's true. But it doesn't mean no one can do it. It doesn't mean that you should just completely kick it out. So same thing with the pure devotee. We have to have that example. Otherwise we become jaded and our faith will be weak. The 11th principle is that one should simply continue applying oneself to the process of surrender until the body drops dead. This is basically, when you're saying what's your life plan, it's basically the life plan. The life plan is that I will just continue doing my service until at some point my body drops dead. Sort of the plan. There's no great retirement plan, no great like this and then this. No, it's just I will continue doing my seva, continue chanting my rounds until at some point I die, and then that's the goal. And we see that recently my own spiritual teacher, he passed away not too long ago, and that's exactly just what he did. He didn't do something magical at the end of his life. He just continued doing exactly the same thing that he was doing for the last however many years, which is just continue chanting, speaking about Krishna until his body dropped dead. And that was his goal. That was all he wanted to do. It was just doing the same thing. It says how if you read the end of Prabhupada's commentary on the Bhagavatam, then you see his final translations that he made was in the 14th chapter of the 10th canto. And if you look at those last purports that Prabhupada made, it's not that in those last purports it's somehow something different, or some magical thing that's radically different that he says now, something that is never said before. It was just continuing. He was just continuing doing his commentary until he died. And the point is, that's really the point. It's just to continue doing the same things consistently over a long period of time. That really is a success. So that principle is also there in the idea of surrender. And then the 12th principle is that you continue to perform your duties as long as you are alive. So those two things go together. The 13th principle is the power of residing in a holy place. So for those who are interested in surrendering, one has to get the mercy of the Holy Dham. So that plays out in two ways, meaning that one, if one has the opportunity physically to go to Vrindavan or Ayodhya or Mayapur, these things are essential because the Dham blesses us. You see, here you have to understand that we are, whether we are aware of it or not, we are hugely influenced by our environment. The environment pushes us. It doesn't just push you physically, it pushes you in your heart. Your heart is molded and shaped and pushed every day by all the things you see and the people you connect with and the environment you live in. That's the reality of this world. But when we go to the Holy Dham, you go to a place that is pushing you towards Krishna, even against your will. So therefore, those who have had the experience of traveling to Vrindavan, traveling to Mayapur, spending time there, you really see that, wow, this is not just a luxury. It is an essential part of the process of devotional service. It makes such a big difference to be in the Dham, to be in a place where everybody is interested in surrendering to Krishna. Instead of in a place where almost no one is interested in surrendering to Krishna, and they will, do all kinds of crazy stuff, but the power of a Dham. So then the same thing then we see for those of us who are wherever we live, to then turn your home into a Dham. Don't just live in a normal house, don't just live in a normal apartment. Turn your environment into something that gives you spiritual energy. Turn your house into a Dham. Turn your house into a holy place. So the power of taking your environment and creating an environment that is favorable. But the most favorable being spending time in the actual Dham, spending time in Vrindavan or Mayapur. If you can do it, do it. I always tell people, we don't know, one day the rupee might get stronger than the dollar. And then we're all going to be in trouble. Because then it's going to be very expensive to go to India. So while we can go. While the dollar is still strong, go spend time, makes it much easier. Imagine if the Holy Dham was in, California. Then it's like, jeez, then it's like so expensive to go there. But we're lucky, we can just go there. It's like affordable, it's easy. So taking that opportunity where we can still just climb in an airplane and fly to Vrindavan and get that opportunity to be there. Very unique. We see that in times gone by, people would sometimes make these travels to holy places, not knowing whether they would return. They would go, and you don't know if you're going to make it. You might die on the way there, you might die on the way back, because you have to walk all the way there. So, the great opportunities we have in this world to easily be able to access a holy place. The 14th principle of surrender is to use your time to study the Ramayana. So for those who are interested in surrender, this is a very important point. When you get the point, okay, the point is to surrender unto Krishna. We sometimes, in the beginning of our spiritual life, we have these deep experiences with reading. We read Prabhupada's books, and we're like, wow, this is amazing, and we get it. And then at some point we stop, because you think, well, I sort of know it, I've read it now, I'm not going to read something I haven't read before, I'm going to read something that I haven't heard before. But that is not really how it works. Reading is just like, it's like eating. Just because you have eaten yesterday, doesn't mean you don't have to eat today. So, we have to continually hear and read these things. Even if you've heard it 1,000 times. It's not about getting new information. It's not about necessarily even hearing something new. Even though the reality is we do. You know, this is the interesting thing. And even when you read these books again, you will always pick up stuff that you never heard before. But even if you read something you've read so many times before, that is part of the process of surrender. You will see that if you look realistically at what people do, what do people do? They work. We work because we have to pay our bills, and we have to pay our taxes and buy all the things we need. And then what do we do when we're not working? Well, a huge portion of our time, we either watch movies, we watch series, or we read something. That is what humans do. It means that a huge portion of our time is going in the realm of entertainment. What now the whole entertainment industry is built on is in grabbing that time, that extra time and energy that we have, and they suck it in. And they can conjure up all kinds of interesting things now with multimedia that can trap our attention. But if you understand that that time that you spend, with what you spend on watching stuff, whatever your content is, whether it's reading something or watching something, if you can take, however much you can take of that time and give that to Krishna, there magical things will happen. That's really where the process of surrender starts to pick up a whole different kind of momentum. Because that is really that's when you are cultivating what's happening in your heart. And this is the great misfortune of the modern world, is that we do not understand there is no such thing as secular entertainment. There's no such thing as entertainment that doesn't have a consequence. Everything, just like the Ramayana is filled with the poetic suggestiveness of trying to push us to surrendering to Lord Ram. Everything that you watch, everything that you read is pushing you towards something. There is no such thing as anything neutral. There's nothing neutral in this world. Everything in this world is composed of 3 modes of nature. And whatever you take in, it's going to push you to one of these 3 directions. So we see that then a big part of surrendering is in taking a big portion of your time, as much as you can, and devoting that to your entertainment, your content that you consume. Have that be related to Krishna, Lord Ram, or whatever it is within the realm of Krishna consciousness. That's really where it happens. That's really where your life starts to transform. And in the beginning, it might not be because for entertainment, because the taste might not be there, but we see that in the beginning, the big impetus is the desire for purification. The beginning, a real big beginning. Because the problem is that it's difficult to compete with the world outside. You know, modern movies and modern media, stuff is so powerful. So powerful. It's just like if you have people who come to Krishna consciousness but they're used to taking cocaine or MDMA. You know, it's going to be a while. It's going to take a while before you get a comparative experience, because it's just so physically intense, you know, and it completely overwhelms the senses, and that addiction stays very strong because it's very sensual, it's very intense. And in Krishna consciousness, at the beginning, when you have these experiences, it can take a while to adjust to a culture that's not so, you know, not that extreme. But so in the beginning, a big part of reading the Ramayana, reading this literature, is doing it from the desire to become purified. To understand that if I hear and chant about Krishna, my heart becomes purified. Therefore we do it in a very regulated way. So therefore, a big part of the process of surrender is to continually hear. Take some time to hear the Ramayana, which means to hear anything related to Krishna. The 15th teaching is that the commentator shows how the meaning of the Gayatri mantra is explained in the Ramayana. We'll get into the details of it. For those of you who chant Gayatri, it's very interesting. You read his commentary, it shows how like all the various syllables of the Gayatri mantra is reflected in the Ramayana. And it's interesting, but we won't get into that. In the 16th principle, we see the importance for those who are surrendering is to avoid deviant writings. So we see in the Ramayana, this is an interesting point, that we have to really be careful to not expose ourselves to things that are against our principles. Now again, in the modern world, very difficult, very, very difficult. We see that there was a culture, even 30, 40 years ago, where the government would try to protect people from things that were considered to be morally inappropriate, with content and stuff. Something like pornography was just, it was so, you really had to go look for it, but very illegal in many places, even in so-called liberal states, liberal parts of the world. But we've seen slowly over time that any kind of boundaries of any kind of thing of censorship is completely over. The government is completely not protecting anyone from anything anymore. It's like all on you. And the church at some point would be very vocal. If a video game comes out, I mean, even when I was growing up, there would be an extremely violent video game. And then the church would come and like different religious leaders would complain that, our kids are playing these things and, how can we just have our kids be exposed to this stuff? But that has all died down now. At this point, it's just, who can stop it? Just go for it. Everybody has a phone, and on your phone you can just get whatever you want. And content that people are creating, especially since we have gone to streaming services, is very interesting because now streaming services have much less regulation than content that gets broadcast on the television. So the television, there was still a certain kind of control over what could be on, because on the television you don't have control who's seeing it. It's like, it can just be, it's just transmitted. So there, if you look at the law, and you even see today, most of your heavier shows, your riskier stuff, would be on channels that don't have a TV presence, that are purely streaming. Because the regulations are just not so strong, because it's all streamed. They're not bound by the same regulations as stuff that is broadcasted on television. So the point is that to stick to your values is very difficult, because there's so much stuff just being thrown out every day that is actually completely contrary to our principles. But what can we do? It's just there and we consume it. So here we see Lord Ram. There's a few examples where he would avoid deviant writings. We see that when Ram was kicked out of Ayodhya, then he was approached by Jabali. So Jabali was the priest of his father. He was like a Brahmin, the priest of Maharaj Dasharatha. And he came to Lord Ram to try to explain to Lord Ram how he shouldn't just disregard your father's request. Just stay here and become the king. Just let your father break his promise. Just don't listen to him. And he was convincing him on the basis of what we would call today hedonism. Whereas, hedonism in the modern world means at some point hedonism, like Prabhupada explains how in the Vedic times, the classical hedonist was Charvaka Muni. And he would advise people, he said, just however you get, just get ghee. Just get ghee. That's, the worst hedonist in Vedic times. He was just saying, just steal money, whatever, just buy ghee and eat ghee, and then, that's just, that's the most wonderful thing you can do if you're a hedonist. Now, obviously, modern hedonism, it pushed the boundaries a little more. I don't know if you would search for, hedonism, if you're going to get ghee advertisements, you probably get something a little different. But, so we see Jabali, he was representing this idea that sense gratification, the highest principle is your own benefit. That's it. The highest thing in life is just your own dream, your own benefit. You can't sacrifice your own happiness for, for these like stupid rules. So we see that Lord Ram was very heavy in arguing with Jabali. He explained to him that no. He said that Jabali's argument was, what is the point of following Dharma if it leads to suffering? What's the point? You follow Dharma up to the extent that it doesn't hamper your own happiness. And the moment that there's a divergence between sort of your own happiness and Dharma, then you just take a little detour until you can later, come back to the Dharma thing again. but you sort of always err on the side of your own interest. And we see that Lord Ram asserts very strongly the importance of following Dharma and keeping his father's promise, allowing his father to keep his promise, even if it comes at great personal expense, great personal sacrifice. And he did that. So another point that the commentators say that this is a big part of the Ramayana is to avoid deviant writings. Avoid stuff that is against your principles. Avoid hearing from people and opening your mind to people who do not have any appreciation or value for the things that you believe in. But we do that so many times. We listen to people speak, we read the stuff, we expose ourselves to the products of people who are completely opposed towards our principles of life. But we do it regularly. It's very difficult to avoid. But Lord Ram set that example. The 17th principle, 17th cardinal teaching of the Ramayana, is that even great souls encounter calamities. And that's a very interesting point. We see that both in the Mahabharata and in the Ramayana, that there's the pure devotees of Krishna, but their lives were not easy. I remember the first time I read the Prabhupada Lilamrita, I was still at that point sort of getting into Krishna consciousness, still trying to find my feet. And I was reading the Lilamrita and I was very gripped by it. So fascinating. I love Bhagavata and I was reading. And then at some point there's this instance where Prabhupada, where he was in Vrindavan, distributing books, and a cow just came out of nowhere and gored him and just threw him on the ground. And I remember that point, I just had to put the book down and I was like, wow, this is just, this doesn't make sense. Right? It's the pure devotee, he gets heat stroke and a cow just randomly comes. Why would this happen? No. It's an essential part, essential teaching of the Ramayana, is that even great souls encounter calamities. It's not that the great souls who just have this easy life, no, they oftentimes are put into more tribulations than the rest of us. Prabhupada also gave the example of Jesus Christ. Look at what happened to Jesus Christ. So that is the nature of the pure devotees. There's calamities there. And therefore the teaching is that they set the example that one should desire to get out of the material world. And that's what's shown by the Pandavas and by the Ramayana. It's not easy. And Krishna does that because he sets the example of showing, yes, everyone has to have that desire. This is not our ultimate home. And then the 18th cardinal teaching is showing how in various parts of the Ramayana, the 64 Vedic arts are all taught indirectly, whether it's grammar and art and shows, because the Ramayana is very big and oftentimes when we read it, we will read abridged editions. But if you read the full edition, there's all kinds of other conversations and things that happen in which a lot of other information is always also presented. So he's saying that is also part of the Ramayana. So that was the 18 cardinal teachings of the Ramayana. So very interesting. I found, as I said, for anybody who likes to read and who is used to reading Prabhupada's Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, getting these verse for verse translations of the Ramayana makes a huge difference. And it takes ages to read the thing. It's not like a book you pick up and read. It's just, for me, it's just something I read little bits every day, just make it part of my routine. And you really pick up so many wonderful things. And also exposes us. It's sometimes something, at least for those of us who were not born into the culture, we get hugely exposed to Krishna, to Lord Chaitanya. This is a very big emphasis of our movement. But Lord Ram is really essential, very important. And also establishing that relationship with Lord Ram, because he does show us ultimately, he is mainly showing us that practical example of what it looks like to follow Dharma as a human. So Lord Chaitanya also shows us what does it mean like to be a devotee in the world. So Krishna shows us the world of God, which is what we are aspiring to. But then Lord Ram and Lord Chaitanya has that same principle where they set an example that we should follow, that we follow in their footsteps. So amazingly, this character of Lord Ram, just very wonderful. And these devotees have really done a great job of taking something very traditional, translating and presenting it in a way that is very accessible to us. So those were a few thoughts on the Ramayana. Let's see, we have a few minutes left for if there's any questions. If you have a question, or if you have a comment, or if anything that was said that you found interesting that you will take away with you, you can also share that with us. Always nice to hear from everyone what they found to be the most valuable in what was presented. So you feel it. Yes, go.
Thank you, Prabhu. This is really inspiring. I missed the start. What's the author whose Ramayana you're reading from?
So this is the Valmiki Ramayana. It's translated by the devotee called Vidwan Prabhu. They have, you know, these Brahmanas are very humble, so it's not his name on the book. It's something called the Rupa Raghunath Vani Publications. But it's actually Vidwan Prabhu from Mayapur who's sort of behind the project. But this commentary we were reading from is from the commentary of Sri Govindaraj, who was in the Sri Sampradaya. It's a very traditional commentary. So his commentary is basically interwoven through the text. And then these 18 cardinal teachings of the Ramayana comes from that ancient commentary, that traditional commentary that says this is the point of the Ramayana. Anything else? Any other questions or comments? Yes, Guru.
Thanks so much for your talk. I was curious on your thoughts on the Tulsi Ramayana versus the Valmiki translation.
I have to be honest with you, it's one of those rabbit holes that I've not gone down with. Like I haven't. I know that there's that discussions between them. I myself have always read Valmiki Ramayana, and especially. But to be honest with you, if this was if these devotees translated the Tulsi Ramayana, I would have bought that. So. For me, I can't really comment on those two things. Yeah, I haven't really studied it myself, but I know there is some. There's actually quite a few. I was reading. There's quite a few different Ramayana versions as well, not just there's those two. So it's an interesting point. I think especially because the Ramayana is so old, so like even older. Well, I mean, but like comparative to Mahabharata, I mean the events were very ancient. So naturally, a lot of differences coming in there. And then same when you look at even within the Valmiki Ramayana. Look at the Mahabharata and you see how the different districts in India, the differences in there. Like when you go to the North Indian Mahabharata and then the South Indian Mahabharata, it's interesting how there is quite some variation there. Yes, Guru.
Hare Krishna, thank you for your class. Just a quick note on the Tulsidas Ramayana. It's really interesting that Tulsidas doesn't mention the Leela at the end where Lord Ram rejects Sita. He completely removes that from his telling. So I just thought that was a curious difference. My question is, you were mentioning about how we shouldn't, there's so much media out there and so much of what we're consuming is contrary to our principles. In some of these texts, it seems that, in some of these texts, it seems that there is still political intrigue and there's still all kinds of really dark stuff. It's described, about Ravana's different, pleasure gardens and the activities of demons and whatnot. So how do we reconcile that? How do we reconcile the differences? What may appear to be contrary to our principles of, those kinds of activities appearing in our own texts as well.
If you read some prophets' visions on the Mahabharata, for example, and prophets say that what makes it different than mundane intrigue and politics is the fact that Krishna is part of it. Therefore, it all becomes connected to Krishna. And same thing with the Ramayana, all these things. And we say that that's why the Lord does it like that. He makes it possible so that all these intrigues, whatever it is that grabs the human imagination, interest, it can be connected with the Lord. But it has to be that presence of God is there. So naturally that is again related to that fascinating purifying power of the Lord. That if He is somehow connected, that makes it different. The Prophet says, I was reading about Vidura, and Prophet says that reading in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, where Sanatana Goswami, they were doing something, or they were trying to convince Lord Chaitanya to see Maharaj Prataparudra. The Prophet says, actually these devotees, they were like great diplomats. The Prophet says that diplomacy engaged in the service of Krishna is also devotional service. So fascinating, it's the purifying power of Krishna. And I think that, you see, that I for myself have taken great shelter in the Mahabharata, because the Mahabharata is written for the common man. And I was like, that's me! Because I love, political intrigue and all these various things, and I think therefore taking shelter of these books because they can take our natural human interest, but then connect it to Krishna. And like you said, everything is there. Everything is there. Serial killer. Ravana is basically a serial killer. Serial killer and a serial rapist. Everything is there. So these things grab our minds, and then Krishna makes it so that we can find whatever things interest us. But that then we have to remember, that's the principle of surrender. Is that we decide that we will search for whatever we want, but we will search for it within the realm of Krishna. And that's really where that thing comes in. And that is the sacrifice, to say that I will stick within this realm very seriously. And everything will be there, but it has to have that connection with Lord Krishna. Shri Shri Ramachandra Bhagavan ki.
Harivalas Prabhu ki, Srila Prabhupada ki. The dear devotees will now sing for the pleasure of Shri Thank you, Keshwar, for reading all the petitions. Please come forward and we will sing for the Lord.
ISKCON founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada ki jai. EBT founder Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Acharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki jai. Brahm Sigaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasati Gaura Bhaktivinoda ki jai. Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Govindam Shama Radha Kund. Agiri Govardhana ki jai. Shri Vrindavan Dham ki jai. Mayapur Dham Dham. Ganga ki Uramaya ki jai, Tulsi Devi ki jai, Bhakti Devi ki jai, Shri Radha Murlidhar ki jai, Gaurachandra Bhagavan ki jai, Nrsingadev Bhagavan ki jai, Harinam Sankirtan Yoga ki, Priyamardanga Transcendental Book Distribution ki jai, Prasadam Distribution ki jai, Sunday Soul Spot ki jai. Nitai Go Premanandi. Hallelujah. Glory is the assembled devotees. All glory is the assembled devotees. All glory is the assembled devotees. Glory is all glories of Lotus Feet of Shri Guru and Shri Guru.
Namaste Narasimhaya.
Namaste Narasimhaya.
Namaste Narasimhaya.
Namaste Narasimhaya.
Hiranyakashi
Jai. Thank you all so much again for coming to Bhagavata Sravana, and I don't know where he went, but thank you again to Hari Vilasa Guru for speaking, and Sukanti Gurungi and Jani Thai and Permanent Vilasa for leading Kirtan. Next week, actually, we will post this on the temple newsletter and WhatsApp. The Bhagavata Sravana will be canceled next week. Why? Because we're actually having next weekend a devotee care course. Jani Thai and Lord Bhakti Prabhu are leading. And so to facilitate that, Bhagavata Sravana will be canceled. But other than next week, Bhagavata Sravana is never canceled. So please come. We will be back up the following week and going for the following week like that. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna. Please stay. We have lunch prasadam served in the back for all of you.
Can you mention that we leave at 1:40 to go to the soul spot?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. Today there's also a special Soul Spot Harinam happening in Washington Square Park. So Jani Tai and crew is going to be leaving at 1:40 from Bhakti Center to walk over to Washington Square Park if you would like to join. There's going to be kirtan and a book table and prasad distribution as well, and prasad distribution. So.
When is going to be please?
I'm sorry?
When is going to be the Washington?
At 1:40 leaving.